Good morning, everyone. I'll call the meeting to order. I reflect on the fact that this meeting has occurred for almost 50 years. So next year, we'll have to really bring some champagne, or I don't know if we want to celebrate this or not, but it's been a long, long journey, and I'm so grateful to all of you, and the participants and your staffs and everyone who just make sure that our city is running in a top-notch fashion, and I feel very confident that we are, and I want to just look forward to this conversation as well, the Fiscal Control Board meeting of August 15, 2024. Calling the meeting order, I'd like to note that the following designated observers are in attendance today. Matthew Harnish, observer for the Speaker of the Assembly. Mark Wurzel, observer for the City Council Minority Leader. And at this point, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the last annual board meeting, which was held September 5th, 2023.
So moved. Second.
All right, second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Nays? Ayes have it, okay. The minutes were distributed before you have the motion. Okay, we have our review of the financial plan now. The next item is the financial plan for fiscal years 2025 to 2028. Mayor Adams, before I introduce you, I want to thank you for your incredible partnership that you've shown to me personally, but also the relationship between the city and the state. I don't know if it's ever been as deep as it is today. And I just think about the last time we were together, 2 weeks ago, we were working hard to shut down over 1,000 illegal cannabis shops, padlocked because of our collective efforts. And I'll say this is not just good for those businesses, but also means more money coming into the state and city coffers. And so those are just one of the ways that we're always looking to find creative opportunities for more revenue, something you're very focused on, and making sure we continue to support New Yorkers. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I understand you'll present the city's four-year financial plan. Mr. Mayor.
State. And every challenging moment, we were able to rely on you from the beginning with the subway safety plan. We're seeing record numbers of safety in our subway system, to the asylum and the migrant crises. You were there. You were there when we needed to deal with the cannabis issue, from housing. Your unprecedented loyalty to the state and to this city. I cannot thank you enough. Just a clear moral compass of moving our state forward. And we would not have been able to accomplish what we've accomplished if it wasn't for the partnership, the relationship, and your leadership. And I thank you. And I think the state is in the right hands, and we're going to continue to move forward. And I want to thank everyone that's here, and I want to acknowledge the controller of the state of New York, Tom DiNapoli, and controller of New York City, Brad Lander, and the private members, a true New Yorker, Dean Foulihan, for your commitment in the state and in the city, the Marjorie Henning and William Thompson Jr., former controller as well. So I think if anyone knows how well I've done, you do. So I want to thank all the members, and I'm really proud to have who has really showed the steady hand and the right leadership, Jock Jihad. Jock has navigated the challenging times that we've had to experience here in the city of New York. His relationship with Albany, his relationship with all of the agencies, he has just really showed the leadership that we needed during these very difficult times. We took office, had a clear promise. Public safety is a prerequisite to prosperity. I'm going to say that over and over again. And we wanted to address the concerns of everyday New Yorkers in general, but specifically working class people. For far too long, they felt as though they did not have a future in this city, and we wanted to be clear and focused on giving them that future they deserve. And the city must become more affordable. And because we have delivered on those promises, I'm happy to report that the city's fiscal outlook is strong. New York is the safest big city in America, the safest big city in America. And this is true on our streets and in our subway system. When you looked at the record level of safety, it is extremely impressive. Crime overall fell for the 7th consecutive month in July, with notable declines in burglaries. And our NYS developments are safer today than they were last year, and we have taken over 17,600 illegal guns, off the streets since the start of the administration, and launched a $500 million blueprint to keep communities safe from gun violence, which would have both helped police shooters across the city by double digits, bringing down those shooters. The city has also seen 6 straight months of double-digit drops in subway crimes since we directed the NYPD to surge officers in the subway system, going back to the subway safety plan that the governor led us on, and we're seeing true results because of that plan. Aside from the pandemic-related issues, major crime in the subways are at the lowest level in 14 years. And to battle the scourge of illegal cannabis shops, thanks to the powers that the state we received from the state, our administration's Operation Padlock to Protect has already padlocked over 900 illegal smoke shops and seized nearly $60 million in illegal products. Crime is down, jobs are up. Don't let anyone tell you anything other than that. Crime down, jobs are up. And if I was in the right setting, I would have us all chant that together, because that's how successful we've been. And I could not be prouder of the jobs in this city. We now have a record high of 4.76 million jobs, nearly 46,000 above the pre-pandemic level. 334,000 of those jobs were created under this administration. And since we took office, something that troubled me from day one, black and brown unemployment was hurting the city. Black unemployment was almost 4 times the rates of white unemployment, so we zeroed in on it. We knew that we had to be specific and focused. We decreased black and Hispanic unemployment by close to 30%, to 7.3% for black unemployment, the lowest figure in half a decade, and 6.5% for Latino unemployment. Our administration has additionally broken the record for the most small businesses in our city's history, the most small businesses in our city's history. On top of historic job and business growth, we are keeping the city more affordable for working-class New Yorkers. The Earned Income Tax Credit we helped push through Albany has generated $345 million in tax credits for over 746,000 low to moderate income New Yorkers, especially parents with children. This put an average of $345 back in the pockets to offset the rising cost of housing, food, and health care. We are also wiping out $2 billion in medical debt for qualified low-income and severely debt-burdened New Yorkers. One of the #1 causes of going into bankruptcy is medical debt. We're hitting it straight on and addressing the issue. And more New Yorkers than ever before have access to a low-cost Metro card as part of the Fair Fares program. We help CUNY meet the financial challenge of adjusting to declining enrollment. And to address a generational housing crisis, we have only shattered affordable housing records in the last 2 years, including financing the most affordable housing in 1 year, but also have the largest affordable housing plan in city history, which will help us hit our moonshot goal of building 500,000 units of new homes by 2032. And to make it easy for families to get by, we reduced the cost of subsidized child care. This was so important to our administration. For a family earning $55 a year, child care went from $55 a week, is now down to just $5 a week. While continuing to work to give every child who wants an early child education and seek access to one, we're moving towards that goal, and we will accomplish that goal. Further, our city is becoming cleaner and greener day after day. Consumer spending remains strong, and we expect to welcome a record level of 68 million tourists to our city. And every time I meet them, I tell them the same thing: spend money, spend money. We want the money right here. Our success is not an accident. Simply put, is a product of the strong fiscal management this administration has practiced since day one. This includes carefully estimating tax revenues so that we live within our means, staying focused on achieving savings, using taxpayers' dollars efficiently, and monitoring spending. From day one, that was my mission and that was my goal. Our administrations had to do what everyday homeowners are doing, and that is managing the money we spend. And there's no great example of effective and responsible fiscal management than the actions we took managing the tremendous challenges we faced this budget cycle. Unprecedented. This includes the cost of housing and caring for more than 212,000 migrants and asylum seekers. Since the spring of 2022, nearly 64,000 of which are still in city's care with very limited assistance from the federal government. We accomplished this by being smart and by ensuring we had real programs in place, particularly our 30-day program that was in place for single adults. New Yorkers cannot sustain people coming from anywhere on the globe staying as long as they want on New Yorkers' dime. That makes no sense, and we were not going to tolerate that. We had to address budget cliffs caused by expiring stimulus dollars that had been used to fund long-term programs. Previous administration put in place stimulus dollars for permanent programs that were sunsetting, and we had to figure out how to keep those programs going and getting it accomplished and getting it done, and we did. And finally, we had to adjust costs related to setting labor agreements with hard-working city employees that had gone years without a fair share. One union in particular, the ferry boat operators, was over 13 years without a contract. Our police officers were not getting a contract. DC 37 employees were leaving the city because they were not being afforded the right salaries to stay here in the city. We changed that mindset, and over 95% of our contracts are settled, and with almost 96 to 97% ratification rates from those city employees and unions, they can stay in the city that they're making better and safer every day. This all occurred against the backdrop of a slowdown in tax revenue. So we acted early. Day one, I crafted a plan and made tough decisions. That's what leadership does, tough decisions. We implemented 5% pegs in both the November plan and January plan on agency spending, as well as a 30% reduction in asylum seeker spending, and took steps to rein in spending. These actions, along with the economy that has performed better than expected, enabled us to close a historical large $7.1 billion gap in January and stabilize the city's finances. We could not have done this without the state help. As I indicated, the governor has stepped up with us in a huge way, and I want to thank her for committing more than $3 billion directly to the city to fund the cost of housing and caring for asylum seekers, which substantially reduced strain on the budget. Because we stabilized the city fiscal outlook, we were able to restore a small number of PEG savings initiatives and relax the hiring and spending freeze. And I also want to emphasize this. We accomplished this. Unlike other municipalities, when the African-American mayors came to the city, they were amazed that we were able to do this without major cuts to services, raising taxes by a single penny, laying off employees, and reducing our reserves. That has not happened across the country, but it has happened here. We were able to do it without layoffs, without increasing taxes, and maintaining a strong reserves. The adopted budget that was released in June continues the critical work we have done throughout the budget cycle to manage our way through unprecedented challenges and avoid a crisis. The fiscal year 25 budget remains balanced at $112.4 billion. Out-year gaps are manageable at $5.5 billion, $5.6 billion, and $6.5 billion in fiscal years 26 through 28, respectively. We balanced the budget with a combination of savings and better than expected revenues. The adopted budget also achieved savings of nearly $400 million over fiscal year 24 and 25, driven by almost $300 million in debt service savings. Total savings over the 2 years in this budget cycle is $7.9 billion prior to restoration, driven by our 2 PEG saving plans, as well as asylum seeker PEGs in the preliminary and executive budget that brought migrant-related costs down by nearly 30%. We also recognize higher than anticipated revenues over the same 2 fiscal years, reflecting better than anticipated business and property taxes. However, it's important to note that contrary to what many have incorrectly suggested about surging tax revenues, the growth in fiscal year 24 was essentially flat at about 0.5%, or just around $400 million over fiscal year 23. Strong fiscal management includes more than just achieving savings and controlling spending. This year, we have maintained a near record $8.2 billion in reserves. As stimulus funding expires this fall and education budget gaps are reduced, communities across the country face the terrible reality of laying off teachers to make ends meet. But not in this city. We have not laid off one teacher. And we're going to continue to be fiscally smart. Because we made the tough decisions early and managed our way to stable fiscal positions, we were able to protect more than $600 million in critical programs that were funded with stimulus money. As a result, in New York, we have not laid off our educators, our police officers, and our governmental employees. Further, we were able to make restorations and substantial investments in critical areas that invest in the programs and services New Yorkers want and deserve, and most importantly, that address the 3 things that cost them the most: housing, child care, and health care. We also made substantial investments in cultural organizations, libraries, parks, public safety, transit, and more. In closing, for the past 2.5 years, we've had to make tough decisions, but necessary. Decisions because we have faced extraordinary challenges. And if you are working or wondering whether the path we took was correct, if you think we made the right decision, if you think we were able to bring our city through these challenging fiscal times, from COVID to migrant to asylum seekers to crime, don't listen to the noise. Listen to the experts. Moody's, Investor Services, S&P Global Ratings, Fitch Ratings, and Kroll bond rating agencies. They have all praised our strong fiscal management, reported that our fiscal outlook is positive, and have maintained our excellent bond ratings. This administration motivation goes far beyond just meeting the legal and fiduciary responsibilities to balance the budget. By managing the city resources responsibly and effectively, we have made sure the city agencies have the resources to meet the needs of New Yorkers, including the most vulnerable in our community. We are focused on building our city, building a city that works for all New Yorkers, a city that expands opportunity and prosperity to every neighbor, every neighborhood, and every borough, a city that is safer, greener, cleaner, and more affordable for working-class New Yorkers, a city that little Eric Adams right now in the 3rd grade somewhere will know they will have an opportunity to one day to be the mayor of this great city. I thank you. Our fiscal strength is strong.
Thank you, Mayor, for your incredible leadership in the city, but also your responsible stewardship of the finances, which is the topic of conversation here today. We really appreciate that. Now I have the pleasure of introducing another partner of mine in state government, someone who's been managing the state finances and making sure we are making the smart investments in the future of our state, and that is our great controller, Tom DiNapoli.
Thank you for your leadership and your partnership and for convening us this morning. Thank you, Mayor Adams, for your report and reminding us of your administration's many successes. Appreciated hearing that. I'm joined by Rahul Jain, who is our State Deputy Controller for New York City. I certainly want to acknowledge my colleague in the world of controlling, City Controller Brad Landa. Appreciate the partnership with your office as well. And our public board members, Bill Thompson, the forever controller in my mind, my mentor from the very beginning of my tenure as state controller. Always good to be with you. And to welcome our new public board members, Marjorie Henning, welcome. Dean Fullahan, who used to hold up so many of my bills when I was in the State Assembly, but I have forgiven him of that. Good to see you, Dean, as well. I certainly want to thank Michelle McManus and the Financial Control Board staff. It is always great to work with you and your team as well. Today, as you know, our office published our report on the city's fiscal year 2025 budget and financial plan. Copies are available for all the board members and online for everybody else. I'd like to go over some of the observations and the highlights that are included in that report on the city's economic and fiscal outlook to provide some further insight into today's important discussion. The preliminary operating results for fiscal year 2024 tell a continuing positive story about New York City's economic resilience and reminds us of the importance of cautiously prepared and thoughtfully presented budgets. For the fourth year in a row, city revenues exceeded expectations by a wide margin, about $3.4 billion, 4.5% higher than initially projected when the budget was adopted in June of last year. Through fiscal year 2025, city revenue projections are now $8.2 billion higher than in June of 2023. Increased revenue has been the leading factor in helping to close budget gaps across 2 years. Revenue collections remain strong as businesses continue to see profitability grow and as visitors and workers return to the city. Higher than expected revenues in recent years have been a key factor in allowing the city to fund under-budgeted items and new programs funded by one-time pandemic aid and mitigate unforeseen fiscal pressures, including the significant cost of managing the asylum seeker influx. However, as the city has revised projected growth rates upward to reflect recent trends, we may begin to see a smaller margin between projected and actual revenue collections. And while jobs continue to grow, certain key sectors such as information and financial activities have seen employment decline in 2024, while other industries such as retail and construction remain behind pre-pandemic employment levels. So we're seeing the potential for slower economic growth and narrowing revenue margins, bringing city spending into greater focus. On the spending side of the ledger, another major contributor to budget balance in fiscal years 2024 and 2025 has been the reintroduction of savings initiatives known as the Program to Eliminate the Gap, PEG. In September 2023, in response to increased projections of asylum seeker costs, the city introduced what would have been the most substantial PEG on record, calling for 3 rounds of 5% savings totaling nearly 15% of agency spending. However, due to better than projected revenues and the enactment of some local and federal policy changes, which led to revisions of planned asylum seeker spending, the city ultimately was able to taper the January PEG and cancel the agency PEG in April. In sum, the fiscal year 2024 PEG is still expected to generate substantial savings to reduce planned gaps by an average of $3.8 billion annually in fiscal years 2024 and 2025. The city's own projection of budget gaps now average nearly $5.9 billion in fiscal years 2026 to 2028, a reduction from the out-year gaps last year. This is an accomplishment and a testament to the city's economic resilience. Additionally, the gaps could be reduced by contingency line items, which, if left unused, could reduce gaps from an average 6.8% to 5.1% of revenues. However, the public response to the PEGs suggests there will be continued pressure to restore and add funding to maintain services. A number of PEG initiatives were broad-based measures to reduce agency headcount that increased in the years prior to the pandemic. Actual full-time headcount of workers has now declined to levels last seen in fiscal year 2016. While city workers continue to do an admirable job maintaining service levels, there are some agencies experiencing increased demand now, which may require hiring that would exceed current projections. Increased pressure to add jobs to manage this new demand could diminish savings from the PEG. In addition, the popularity of certain programs and the availability of additional revenue led the city to restore about half of planned service reductions, illustrating the potential difficulties with identifying future sources of savings if fiscal conditions were to change. The city has shown an ability in recent years to manage complex and unforeseen challenges, and I believe it will continue to do so. However, preparation for those challenges is fundamental to sound fiscal management. there are still steps the city can take to prepare itself for what may lie ahead. First, continued revenue strength remains the simplest path to budget balance, and that comes by fostering a growing economy. The city must continue to deliver on maintaining and improving services, including public safety, education, water, parks, and waste removal, to retain and attract residents and businesses without increasing the cost of living and doing business here. My office released a tracker earlier this year that links performance data the city provides publicly, along with staffing and spending data. Our tracker shows that many services have improved, but that some have deteriorated. We need to have honest and transparent discussions of these metrics and how the budget affects their delivery. Secondly, for the second year in a row, the city generated a smaller surplus than last year and has not set aside additional funds in its reserves. The choice to allocate additional resources from increased revenues and PEG savings to new spending rather than to the city's reserve funds is a missed opportunity to mitigate fiscal risk. Given planned spending, current reserve levels leave the city less prepared for fiscal uncertainties than it was in June of 2022. Lastly, the city should improve transparency with regard to its larger budget risks. Consistent under-budgeting for known spending risks from unfunded educational programming, social services, and the MTA could amount to nearly $2.2 billion in 2025 and rise to nearly $7.1 billion by 2027. Transparency on these issues goes beyond providing adequate funding in the budget, although that is a prudent and necessary fiscal decision. But the city must also explain to the public the sources and reasons for what is driving spending trends and refine policies to provide services at a more cost-effective rate. For example, recent details provided by the city about the magnitude of the asylum seeker population and the associated costs encourage the state to take on a portion of the expense and has also enabled refinement of shelter policies to reduce the fiscal impact. This type of explanation applies to risks that have existed for years, such as overtime spending, and to those that have recently emerged, such as the cost of rental assistance vouchers. Greater transparency can help the public understand the nature of these challenges and encourage stakeholders to step up and support the city's efforts to manage them. It's also critical for ensuring residents understand the difficult operational choices that lie ahead, from the class size mandate to the planned closure of Rikers and the fiscal burden of such outcomes. On the issue of asylum seekers, I reiterate the call of the mayor, of city and state officials, of the governor over the past 2 years, namely that immigration is a federal issue and that the federal government has to lead. Recent actions on the border suggest these concerns are being heard, but any response should also include providing matching funding to help shoulder the immense burden on the city. Considering the various risks we have identified, my office projects that budget gaps could grow to nearly $2.3 billion in fiscal year 2025, $8.5 billion in fiscal year 2026, nearly $10 billion in fiscal year 27, and $12.8 billion in fiscal year 2028. Right now, the city has an opportunity to provide confidence to residents and businesses by communicating the budgetary and operational challenges it faces and how the city intends to overcome them, without hurting affordability or adding to the burdens that could weigh down future economic growth. I know that by working together, state and city officials can continue to ensure New York City is ready for those fiscal and operational challenges. As always, the Office of the State Controller stands ready to assist in any way that we can. Again, I want to thank all of my elected colleagues on the board and the public members, the staff of the Control Board, the City Controller's Office, the Office of Management and Budget, the City Council, and the State Division of the Budget for all of your work during these challenging times. Thank you.
Thank you, Comptroller DiNapoli. At this time, we will ask City Controller Lander, do you have any comments on the city's financial plan?
Good morning. Thank you very much for your report and your leadership. Thank you to my friend Tom DiNapoli, whose report actually very closely mirrors mine, for your mentorship and friendship and support. And it's wonderful to be joined by the continuing and new private members to former and always Controller Bill Thompson, who has continued to be a mentor and a guide to me and to our office, to former Deputy Controller for Public Finance, Marge Henning, from whom I've learned a great deal and had the really good pleasure to work and learn a lot, and former First Deputy Mayor and Budget Director Dean Foolahan, a great friend to our office and to the city as a whole. It is wonderful to be here. As it does each year, this meeting offers an important opportunity to reflect on the economic and financial outlook facing New York City. Like the State Controller, today we're releasing our report on the adopted budget and the state of the city's economy. Thank you to Executive Deputy Controller Francesco Brindisi and Deputy Controller Krista Olson for their hard work on this. And I would also point people to our municipal workforce dashboard, which is a great look into trends in city employment and pairs very well with the report that the State Controller referred to as well. My remarks this year revolve around three themes. First, while we continue to have many core strengths and signs of recovery, the New York City economy is facing significant challenges as we move forward. On the plus side, a low unemployment rate, rising job openings, and historically high labor force participation rates are all encouraging. I'm also very pleased to report that for fiscal year 2024, pension fund returns for the city's 5 pension funds, which represent the retirement security of our teachers and cops and firefighters and public hospital nurses and school crossing guards, the people who make this city run, were a robust 10%. That's stronger than our friends at CalPERS and CalSTRS, and well above our actuarial rate set by the state legislature of 7%. As a result, the city budget will see savings of $1.8 billion over the next 5 years. However, over the past year, private sector employment, as the State Controller noted, has been growing solely, on the strength of relatively low-wage sectors, particularly health services and social assistance, while major industry sectors, including professional and business services, information technology, and the financial sector, posted year-over-year job losses. The office market appears to have stabilized with high availability rates of around 17% citywide, but market rents are starting to edge up, raising hopes that the sector's decline has bottomed out. Meanwhile, affordability broadly and housing affordability most certainly remains the #1 issue facing working families in New York City, with rents up 20% from already record high pre-pandemic levels, vacancy rates lower than ever, and rent burdens rising. Meanwhile, inflation in the metro region, after trending down in 2023, has picked up since the beginning of the year and has now surpassed the nation's. And recent data that we published earlier this week shows that consumer debt burden and delinquencies are rising in New York City, especially in the Bronx, especially amongst low-income households. And there's real worry that that will worsen after student debt begins being reported and collected in the coming months. All of that is after significant declines that were likely the result of federal pandemic stimulus, but present real challenges for working New Yorkers. Second, the city's fiscal outlook is muddied by under-budgeting in the financial plan projections. My office projects that in each year, from FY 25 to 28, expenses are under-budgeted by approximately $3 billion, significantly exceeding projected upside from city revenues. The city must be more transparent about these costs, which include uniformed overtime, special education Carter cases, contributions to the MTA, public assistance, and the city's rental assistance programs, all of which are persistent areas of under-budgeting, and look to control them with more transparency in the budgeting, with proper planning and stronger management. The population of asylum seekers in city shelters appears to have stabilized after rising sharply in 2022 and 2023, and then dropping slightly at the beginning of 24. This trend, coupled with a gradual shift away from emergency contracting, will hopefully result in lower than budgeted costs in fiscal year 2025. In 26 and beyond, much will depend on whether the federal government steps up, as we all agree it must, on whether the financial plan assumptions for state aid are met and continue, on the trajectory of the influx, on whether or not costs are brought under control through more competitive and effective procurement, and on whether we are effectively connecting people to the services that they need to get work authorization and move into stable employment and housing, something that for all we are spending, we are still not tracking. In addition, city and state budgets will need to accommodate the mandated decrease in class size, which could require annual yearly funding of over $1.5 billion at full implementation in fiscal year 28. Overall, my office estimates a manageable gap of $1.59 billion for FY25, but much larger gaps of $9.2 billion in FY26, $10.5 billion in FY27, and $12.7 billion in fiscal year 2028. Third, the city needs to confront these economic and fiscal challenges by adopting a stronger fiscal framework. As the governor noted, next year will be the 50th anniversary of the Financial Emergency Act, when leaders came together to save the city from its fiscal crisis and set it on a more solid path for the future. They made, in the midst of that crisis, a number of critical steps for the city's financial stability, which have paid off in significant ways, as the mayor referred to, in how we are viewed by the credit agencies. But it is time, 50 years later, to modernize that fiscal framework and set us on a more solid foundation for the future. So my office proposed that the Charter Revision Commission place the following 5 items, and I'll go through them just very briefly, on voters' ballots this fall. The adoption of a policy first to govern the target size, deposits, and withdrawals from the city's rainy day fund. My office put forward a formula that would take it out of the vicissitudes of the budget negotiations. This year it would have recalled for a relatively modest deposit of $150 million, but none was budgeted. I'm open to a different formula, a different framework than the one that we put forward, but the lack of any such framework remains troubling and should be changed. 2, we should mandate regular efficiency reviews and long-term savings targets, including agency accountability for judgments and claims against the city, rather than only conducting PEG exercises sporadically. And we should provide a regular opportunity for oversight bodies, exactly like the people around this table, to assess whether those savings plans are actually achieved. 3, we should cap debt at 15% of city tax revenues and use the capital stabilization reserve to ensure this target is maintained, something that's especially important following the state legislature and the governor. Thank you for your leadership, for the authorized increase in the city's debt capacity, something that's critical and that it's critical to keep a close eye on. 4th, we should modernize the city's approach to infrastructure assessment, capital planning, and budgeting to comply with the Government Finance Officers Association best practices. And 5th, we should mandate timeframes for each stage of the city's contracting process so we can start paying our vendors, especially our MWPEs and nonprofit human service providers, but really all of them, on time instead of averaging about 10 months late. I'm disappointed that the Charter Revision Commission did not adopt any of these recommendations. It was a missed opportunity, but they can still be implemented by local law and policy, and I urge the mayor and the city council to do so. I want to expand briefly on a 6th recommendation relevant especially for the state, which is to make the core features of the Financial Emergency Act permanent and update the fiscal monitoring provided by this board. The FEA established the pillars for the city's current fiscal framework: budgets balanced according to GAAP for your financial plans, the prohibition of borrowing to cover operating deficits, and the retention of property tax revenues to pay GO bond debt service. But this act and this board are only alive today because of covenants included in outstanding bonds, which will mature over the next decade and change. While the option to include those covenants in new issuances has been extended every year, the city hasn't exercised it since 2003. So it is time to make the FEA's key provisions permanent and revisit the fiscal monitoring this board does, which lost the authority to institute a control period back in 2008. Beyond the good annual certification we're here to make, the board should be authorized to work jointly with the state controller, with my office, and the city's independent budget office on an annual review of the reasonableness of the financial plan projections, the attainment of savings plans, and the projections of the city's constitutional debt limit, indebtedness, and debt service. And I hope we can move forward to do those things. With an appropriate and codified structure in place, we can, 50 years on, implement the post-emergency phase of the Financial Emergency Act. In doing so, the city will better deploy our sizable but nonetheless limited resources of taxpayer dollars, federal and state funds, and other revenues to most effectively meet the needs of all New Yorkers for a safe, thriving, healthy, well-educated, more affordable, and well-managed city, and strengthen the city's financial resilience for the years ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comptroller. I'd like to now call on Michelle McManus, the Deputy Director of Finance and Capital, to present the staff comments.
Thank you, Governor. I'd like to go over some of the main points summarized in our report released last week. The local economy is showing signs of slowing down. Total payroll employment is growing, but at a slower pace. Payroll employment in the city has been trending downward in recent years. After shrinking by 7,600 jobs in the first half of 23, total payroll employment in the city grew by almost 60,000 jobs in the first half of 2024, approximately a third of jobs created in the first half of 2022. In the meantime, the unemployment rate, which has been trending down since the depth of the pandemic, appears to be stabilizing at around 5%. The city's average earnings growth has not kept pace with the rate of inflation since the first half of 2022. Despite the drop in inflation in the first half of 2024, the gap between earning growth and the inflation rate widened moderately from the first half of 2023. The city's tourism sector continues to enjoy a robust recovery. The number of revenue passengers arriving at the city's two major airports in the first 5 months of 2024 has now surpassed the passengers who arrived at the same period in 2019. However, the commercial real estate sector continues to be a weak spot in the city's economy. According to Cushman & Wakefield, Manhattan's office vacancy rate in the second quarter of 2024 was higher than the previous quarter and the highest vacancy rate since records became available in 1998. The demand for office space is expected to remain relatively low as hybrid work has become the norm. In the June modification, the fiscal 2024 budget totals $115 billion, an increase of almost $8 billion from the start of the fiscal year, with the categorical funds portion of the budget increasing by $4.5 billion and the city funds portion of the budget increasing by $3.4 billion. The increase in city fund expenditures reflects a prepayment of $4.4 billion of fiscal year 25 debt service. Net of this prepayment, city-funded expenditures are $967 million below the fiscal 24 budget adopted in June 2023, due mainly to the takedown and elimination of the general and capitalization reserves, adjustment of prior year payables, and spending reductions in the program to eliminate the gap, which more than offset the upward revisions to agency spending and asylum seekers' expenditures. The $4.4 billion prepayment is funded with a $967 million reduction in city-funded expenditures and increases of $2.3 billion in tax revenues and $758 million in city fund non-tax revenues. However, while the fiscal 24 budget after the prepayment is gap balanced, expenditures net of the prepayments exceed revenue estimates, resulting in an operating budget deficit of almost $1.1 billion, making this the second consecutive year of an operating deficit. The fiscal year 2025 adopted budget totals $112 billion, $810 million more than the fiscal year 25 executive budget. The change is due to $450 million increase in the city funds portion of the budget from an upward revision to property tax revenues and $360 million increase in categorical funds, primarily from the revision to state aid. The net increase of $450 million in city fund revenues, together with an additional $459 million in prepayment, supports a net increase of $909 million in city fund expenditures. Beyond fiscal years 2025, the June financial plan projects budget gaps of $5.5 billion in fiscal year 2026, growing to $6.5 billion by fiscal year 28, as growth in city fund expenditures in this period is projected to outpace growth in city fund revenues. However, the Control Board's risk analysis of the plan shows greater gaps of $6.1 billion in fiscal year '26, $6.9 billion in fiscal year '27, and $8.5 billion in fiscal year '28. The higher gaps are due to the Control Board's estimates of risks to the plan's expenditure projections driven by health and welfare agencies, education, and uniform services over time, which are partly offset by higher tax revenue estimates in these years. In addition, the Control Board estimates a risk estimate of $771 million in fiscal year 2025. The city has outlined a 5-year capital plan for fiscal years '24 to '28 amounting to $98 billion in authorized commitments. In sizing its capital program, the city prioritizes the need to restore existing physical stock and expand infrastructure in categories necessary for growth, compliance, and sustainability. The city projects 80% of the capital plan to be funded with tax-supported debt, with the assumed debt service expense as a percent of tax revenues expected to remain below the city's affordability thresholds of 15% throughout the financial plan based on current tax revenue projections and assumptions of the local economy. There are both planned and potential capital and financing activities that may expand the program and associated debt service expenses. Given the increase in capital funds to support affordable housing, the state legislative approval to increase the amount of outstanding TFA bonds not subject to the constitutional debt limit, as well as the possibility for some large capital projects to be more costly than initially assumed, debt service expenses could be higher than projected, placing added pressure on the city's operating budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle McManus, our Deputy Director of Finance and Capital. At this point, I'd like to ask the private members if they have any comments. The Dean, of course, thank you.
The years of service. First, Governor, let me thank you for your leadership and continued leadership. And by the way, it feels like we haven't moved out of this seat since last year to see you and the mayor sitting again with each other. Your strong partnership has been great for the city and great for the state. And it is something that is not going unnoticed. So again, it is a pleasure for your leadership, Mr. Mayor, for your leadership. Let me put a different hat on for 1 second and thank the both of you for your support of CUNY. This was a difficult year for CUNY. And both of you, without the help and assistance from both of you, it would have been a disaster. Let me thank both of you on behalf of what CUNY is for New York City and New York State and really the nation in producing the leaders of today and tomorrow. So let me thank you both for your support there. It is not, I do have to acknowledge the city controller, so it's always good to see Brad. My buddy, and that's the only way I can describe the state controller, Tom DiNapoli, has been a great friend for years and years. And Tom, it's always a pleasure seeing you, my friend. And our two new members, two great professionals, Marge and Dean. They are great additions to this board. They were great leaders in the city and state. It's a pleasure to see you both. Coming back to the point, Mr. Mayor, let me thank you for your strong fiscal leadership and what it has meant. As you pointed out, it's not always easy to say no. It is not always easy to make cuts when everyone is clamoring for more, and I would include ourselves in CUNY at times on that list. But you stood strong. The city is in strong fiscal shape, and I have to give you great credit for that. And it has been that way since the beginning of your tenure. So congratulations on another strong year. The one thing I would say is things don't happen on their own. The gentleman to my right, the budget director of the city. Budget directors, nobody likes them. Okay? Nobody likes them. I like Chelsea. I've known him for years. He's a friend. But you all put together a great team that has done a great job. So again, let me just thank you for your strong fiscal leadership, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments from our members?
Oh, sure. I'd first like to thank the governor for my appointment to this board. Having studied the Financial Emergency Act since I began working at New York City OMB in 1992, I'm especially gratified to be here today. I also want to thank the mayor for his presentation and the state and city controllers and the FCB for their comprehensive and thoughtful report on the city's budget. The city and the state have had to respond to unprecedented fiscal challenges in recent years with the economic slowdown resulting from the pandemic, followed by hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers finding their way to or being forcibly sent to the city. I believe that in the long run, these new arrivals and their children will provide economic and other benefits to the city and the state that will more than repay the investments we have made to support them while they seek work authorization and get on their feet. If the city is to continue to thrive, it really needs to address the current affordability crisis, especially in housing costs. And I know this isn't really the forum, but here I'll just give a shout out to the mayor's city of Yes, zoning reforms that would really go a long way towards helping to construct more housing in the city. While I'm confident that the city, in partnership with the state, will be able to address all the challenges that may arise in the future, I would like to sound a note of caution, as Michelle pointed out and as the FCB report notes. The fiscal 24 budget, while it is balanced in accordance with GAAP, resulted in an operating budget deficit for the second consecutive year when you back out the prepayments. And with the local economy showing signs of slowing down, the city needs to continue to work hard to ensure that we're delivering needed services as efficiently as possible and managing the capital program to prioritize projects that are necessary for the health and safety of all of our residents in order to keep our debt service costs as low as possible. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just quickly add, thank you, Governor, for the appointment into Blake, Washington. Had something to do with it, so thank you. And it's an honor to be here, really an opportunity to sit at the table from a slightly different perspective. Since it's my first year in this role, I think the successes that have been outlined and the challenges have well articulated. So with that, I really look forward to working with the FCB staff over the next year and working with all of you. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay. Any other comments? Mr. Mayor Adams, you have an opportunity to respond to these comments.
No, thank you. And I thank you for just being great New Yorkers. Let's continue to move our state forward. Thank you very much. And again, thank you, Governor.
We have number 3 on our list is a review of the 2024 and annual determination for FCB to remain in sunset. I'll call on Michelle McManus to report on the staff's finding regarding fiscal year 2024 and the recommendation concerning the proposed resolution.
Thank you. The Financial Emergency Act contains 5 conditions that we review to determine whether or not the city is experiencing fiscal stress. I'd like to go over them now for the board. Number 1, the city shall have incurred a deficit in excess of $100 million in the result of operations. The city has ended fiscal year 2024 subject to the final audit with a budget surplus of $4.4 billion and has prepaid fiscal year 25 expenses. 2, the city shall have failed to pay principal or interest on any of its notes or bonds when due or payable. 3, the city shall have issued notes in violation of restrictions on short-term borrowing set forth in Section 9B of the Act. 4, the controllers shall have jointly certified that they could not, on the basis of facts existing at the time of such certification, make the joint certification required to terminate a control period. The city has paid all principal and interest on its notes and bonds and has not violated any of the short-term borrowing provisions of the FEA. The Financial Control Board has also received letters from both the state and city controllers informing us that they do not see any likelihood that they would have reason to issue a joint certification relating to market access. Number 5, the city shall have violated any provisions of the Act, and such violations substantially impairs the ability of the city to pay principal or interest on its bonds and notes when due or payable, or the city's ability to adhere to or adopt a balanced budget. The city has not violated any provisions of the Act. The staff therefore recommends that the board approve a resolution determining that of August 15, 2024, none of the events that would have required the imposition of a control period has occurred, nor is there a substantial likelihood and imminence of such occurrence, and that the city is not experiencing fiscal stress at this time that would jeopardize the orderly functioning of the city's fiscal affairs. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments? All right, well, I'll now entertain a motion to approve the determination. Is there a second? Second, Controller. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? All right, the motion is passed. I also entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting at this time. All right, is there a motion? So moved. Second? Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Meeting adjourned. We'll see you next year for our 50th anniversary.